Think about the last time you explained yourself to someone who had already decided what they thought of you. You crafted the words carefully. You laid out your reasoning. You made yourself vulnerable, transparent, even defenseless, all in the hope that they would finally understand. And what did it cost you? Not just your energy, not just your time. It cost you something far more valuable. It cost you the one thing no man can afford to give away for free: your power. And here is what Machiavelli understood 500 years ago that most men will still never grasp in their lifetime. The moment you begin explaining yourself to someone who does not deserve your words, you have already lost. Not because your explanation was wrong, not because your reasoning was flawed, but because the act of explaining itself is a signal. It is a declaration, broadcasted loud and clear to everyone watching, that you are seeking approval from forces outside yourself, that your stability depends on their understanding, that without their validation, you cannot move forward. And that, Machiavelli would tell you, is the beginning of every defeat. Today I am going to give you something rare. Not comfort, not reassurance. 7 cold, precise truths about the power that returns the moment you stop explaining yourself. 7 lessons pulled from the philosophy of a man who was exiled, humiliated, stripped of everything he had built, and still managed to write the most dangerous blueprint for power the world has ever known. If you are ready to stop bleeding your energy into conversations that were never going to go in your favor, drop the word sovereign in the comments right now. Let's begin. Lesson 1. Explanation is a request for permission you were never required to ask for. Here is the first thing Machiavelli understood that most men spend their entire lives learning too late. Every time you explain yourself, you are making a request. Not a request for understanding, a request for permission. Permission to feel the way you feel. Permission to have made the decision you made. Permission to be who you already are. And the moment you make that request, you have handed someone the authority to grant or deny it. Think about that carefully. Think about what that means. You have built something. You have made a choice. You have drawn a boundary. And instead of letting that action stand on its own, you open your mouth to justify it, to soften it, to make it palatable for people who were not consulted and were never owed a consultation. And in doing so, you erase the very power that action carried. Machiavelli wrote that a prince who is always explaining his decisions teaches his subjects to question every decision he makes. Because if the decision required an explanation, perhaps it required their agreement. And if it required their agreement, then perhaps he was not truly a prince at all. Perhaps he was simply asking for a vote. Most men who explain compulsively are not doing it out of generosity. They are doing it out of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of standing alone with a choice that someone else might reject. And that fear, once people can sense it, invites the very judgment they were trying to avoid. The coldest truth Machiavelli ever delivered was this: your actions either speak for themselves or they do not speak at all. No explanation will ever give a weak action authority it did not earn. And no explanation will ever rob a powerful action of the authority it carries naturally. So the next time you feel that impulse to explain, to justify, to preemptively soften something you have decided, ask yourself one question. Am I explaining this because it serves me, or because I am afraid of standing alone with this truth? If the answer is the second one, say nothing. Let the action speak. Let the silence speak. And watch how quickly the room rearranges itself around a man who no longer asks for permission to exist. Lesson 2. Every explanation you give is a map to your weaknesses. Listen carefully because this lesson alone, once fully understood, will permanently change how you navigate every relationship, every conflict, and every conversation in your life. When you explain yourself, you are not just sharing information. You are exposing your pressure points. Think about what an explanation actually contains. It contains the thing you are afraid they will think. It contains the outcome you are trying to avoid. It contains the emotion you are working hardest to suppress. And it contains, buried beneath every carefully chosen word, a map of exactly where you can be touched. Exactly what matters enough to you that you cannot let it go unaddressed. Machiavelli studied manipulation not because he was cruel, but because he was honest. And he understood that the people who most often demand explanations are not seeking truth. They are conducting reconnaissance. They are mapping the terrain of your insecurity. They are learning where to press to get a reaction, what topics unsettle you, what accusations send you spiraling into defensiveness, and what losses you cannot endure. Every explanation you offer is intelligence you volunteer to someone who may one day use it against you. The man who never explains himself is the man no one can map. He is the man who cannot be predicted because no one knows where his edges are. No one knows what he protects. No one knows what he fears. And an unmappable man, as Machiavelli would say, is a man who has made himself nearly impossible to manipulate. This is not coldness. This is architecture. You are not closing people out. You are simply choosing what you build in public and what you keep protected. A fortress is not built with its doors open. A general does not announce his strategy to the opposing camp before he moves. And a man who understands power does not hand out blueprints to anyone who asks. The next time someone demands an explanation you feel in your gut that you do not owe, remember this. What they are asking for is not understanding. What they are asking for is access. Access to the interior of your reasoning, your doubts, your vulnerabilities, your fear. And you, entirely and without apology, are allowed to decline. Drop unmappable in the comments right now if this lesson is landing. Because the men who protect their interior are the ones who remain standing when everyone around them has been compromised. Let's keep going. Lesson 3. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is dominance. There is a lie that most people are raised to believe, that silence in the face of accusation means guilt, that silence in the face of conflict means weakness, that the man who does not defend himself must not have a defense. Machiavelli would find this belief extraordinarily useful, because it is precisely this belief that keeps ordinary men permanently on the back foot, permanently reactive, permanently bleeding energy into battles that were designed to exhaust rather than resolve. Here is what silence actually communicates to a room that knows how to read it. It says, "I am not threatened by your opinion of me." It says, "I am not moved by pressure tactics." It says, "I have nothing to prove to you, and I am comfortable in that truth." It says all of these things simultaneously without a single word. And those are among the most powerful statements a man can make in any dynamic, personal, professional, or otherwise. Machiavelli wrote that the wise man does not waste his arrows on shadows. He conserves them for targets that matter. Every defensive response you give to an accusation that does not deserve one is an arrow wasted. Every explanation you offer to someone who has already decided their narrative is ammunition gifted to the very person trying to undermine you. But silence, employed with calm intention, does something different entirely. It disrupts the script. It removes the reaction that the provocation was designed to extract, and it forces the other person to sit in the echo of their own words, with no response to hide behind. Watch what happens in an argument when one person goes completely still. The other escalates. They repeat themselves. They rephrase. They push harder. And in doing so, they reveal far more about their own desperation than they intended. Because the person who needed a reaction did not get one, and that absence unravels them. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is power in its purest, most concentrated form. Master the ability to hear something that would once have sent you spiraling into defensiveness, and simply let it land without lifting a hand to catch it. Let it fall. Let it lie on the floor between you. And then, in complete stillness, let that moment tell whoever is watching everything they need to know about who holds the real position in that room. The man who cannot be rattled cannot be ruled. Lesson 4. The people who demand your explanations the loudest are the ones who need your power the most. This is the lesson that will sound cold until you sit with it long enough for it to become clear. Pay attention to who is asking. Not everyone who asks for an explanation is seeking understanding. Some are. The people who genuinely love you, who have earned trust through consistency and honesty, who ask because the information would help them support you. These people deserve your time and your words and your openness. But then there are the others who demand explanations not to understand you, but to maintain a position of authority over you. The ones who have never respected a decision you made that did not come with justification attached. The ones who use your explanations as debating material, turning your own reasoning back on you to find the crack in the logic they can pry open. The ones who, no matter how thoroughly you explain, will find another question waiting at the end of your answer, like a door that opens onto another door. These people are not confused about what you did. They are uncomfortable with the fact that you did it without asking their approval first. Machiavelli was ruthlessly precise about this. He understood that certain people do not want your reasoning. They want your submission. They want to see you lower yourself into a posture of justification because that posture confirms a hierarchy, one in which they sit above you and you are accountable to them for your choices. And every explanation you offer feeds that hierarchy. The moment you identify someone as this kind of asker, you have two options. You can continue feeding them explanations that will never satisfy because satisfaction was never what they were after. Or you can stop entirely. Let the silence communicate what no argument ever could. And watch as the absence of your justification slowly dissolves the authority they assumed over you. You owe your reasoning to very few people. Choose those people with the precision Machiavelli reserved for choosing allies. They are rare. They are worth it. And the rest, without cruelty, without drama, without explanation, you let them wonder. Because the man who explains himself to everyone is respected by no one. But the man who decides whose opinion has earned his time becomes someone whose opinion others work to earn. Drop selective in the comments if you understand the distinction. This is where power actually lives. Lesson 5. Explaining yourself to the wrong people teaches them how to control you. There is a dynamic that plays out in slow motion in most people's lives, so gradually they cannot see it while it is happening. It begins the first time you explain a decision to someone who had no right to require it. They receive the explanation. Maybe they accept it, maybe they push back. Either way, they have now learned something about you. They have learned that their displeasure is enough to open the door to your interior, that their pressure, applied consistently enough, will produce transparency. And so the next time, they apply the same pressure. And again, you explain. The pattern solidifies. And before long, you have trained someone to believe that your choices require their approval, and that their silence or their approval is a currency you pay for access to your own life. This is not a dramatic betrayal. It is not a sudden manipulation. It is the slow, almost invisible erosion of your authority over your own decisions. And it happens one explanation at a time. Machiavelli understood that every concession teaches the opponent what works. Every time a prince backed down under pressure, he did not resolve the pressure. He demonstrated exactly how much pressure was required to make him move. And those who witnessed it filed the information away for future use. You have done this. Every person reading these words has done this. And the question is not how to punish yourself for it. The question is how to stop it from continuing. The answer is deceptively simple. You stop explaining what you have not been asked to explain. You stop softening decisions before they have even been challenged. You stop preemptively defending choices as though anticipating attack is the same as inviting it. You make the decision, you let it stand. You say nothing that was not required. And you observe carefully who pushes back. Not because of the decision itself, but because the absence of an explanation made them feel that something had been taken from them. That feeling they experience is not theirs to have. It is yours to reclaim. Lesson 6. Your silence forces the world to fill the void with your reputation. Here is a truth that most people never discover because they never stay quiet long enough to witness it. When you stop explaining yourself, the world does not conclude the worst. The world, in the absence of your narrative, begins to write one for you. And what it writes is determined entirely by what it has already observed about how you carry yourself, how you act under pressure, how consistently your behavior aligns with your character. This is the principle of reputation by demonstration rather than declaration. And Machiavelli understood it as the highest, most durable form of influence. The man who talks about himself constantly gives people material to argue with. They have his words. They can dissect them, dispute them, find the inconsistencies between what he claims and what he demonstrates. But the man who says little and moves with precision and consistency gives people only evidence. And evidence cannot be debated the way language can. Evidence simply is. When you stop explaining your actions and simply continue taking them at the same level of integrity, something extraordinary begins to happen around you. People who once needed your justification before granting respect begin to watch you more carefully. Your silence creates a gap, and into that gap flows their attention, their projection of whatever they most associate with composed, deliberate, unflinching men. Your reputation begins to fill the space your words used to occupy, and a reputation built on observation is worth 10 times one built on explanation. Machiavelli wrote that a prince is judged mostly by results, because most men see but do not touch, and the few who touch cannot prevail against the many who see. Your results are what the world touches. Your silence is what the world sees. And when both are aligned, You become something the room cannot argue against, cannot easily diminish, and cannot easily forget. Build in silence. Deliver without announcement. Let the outcome carry the only explanation that has ever truly mattered. Drop reputation in the comments if you understand why the most powerful men rarely need to tell you who they are. Let's finish strong. Lesson 7. Reclaim every word you were never meant to spend. There is a final truth that holds all 6 of these lessons together like a spine holds a body upright. And without it, everything else becomes theory with no ground beneath it. Every word you have ever spent explaining yourself to someone who did not deserve it cost you something you cannot get back. Not just time, not just energy, something more fundamental. Pieces of the internal certainty that, once surrendered often enough, begins to feel like something you have to rebuild from scratch every morning before you are allowed to function. This is the tax that chronic over-explanation collects. When you explain yourself repeatedly to the same people and receive the same non-acceptance in return, you begin to quietly suspect that perhaps you are the problem. Perhaps your reasoning is flawed. Perhaps your decisions require the external validation they keep withholding. And this suspicion, seeded by countless one-sided exchanges where you gave and they took, quietly undermines the only thing that ever made you capable of anything worth building: your unshakable belief in your own judgment. Machiavelli's deepest understanding was not about silence or strategy or power in the conventional sense. It was about this: the cultivation of a man so internally anchored, so completely ungovernable by external pressure, that the world around him, its opinions, its noise, its disapproval, and its demands becomes information rather than instruction. Data to observe, not commands to obey. That is the man who cannot be manipulated. That is the man who does not need to explain because his actions carry their own authority. That is the man who, in the moment of greatest pressure, goes still, and in that stillness communicates more power than 100 arguments ever could. You are building that man right now, not by becoming cold, not by becoming cruel, not by cutting people off or burning what does not need to burn, but by making one fundamental decision that changes the architecture of every interaction you will ever have. You decide that your peace is not up for negotiation, that your decisions do not require a committee, that your direction does not depend on the approval of people who were never consulted because they were never owed consultation. You decide to stop explaining. And the moment that decision becomes real, becomes not just an idea, but a lived, embodied daily practice, something returns to you that you may not even have realized you had given away. Your power. Not the power to dominate, not the power to control. The rarest, most durable power there is. The power of a man who knows exactly who he is and has decided, finally, completely, and without apology, that this is enough. Drop. Power returned in the comments right now. That is your declaration. That is the marker of the moment you stopped bleeding yourself dry for the approval of people who were never going to give it. You came into this video looking for permission to stop. You do not need it. You never did. The Machiavellian code does not ask you to perform strength. It asks you to locate it, to find it in the silence, in the stillness, in the unshakable refusal to let anyone else's noise become louder than your own internal knowing. Carry these 7 lessons not as inspiration that fades by morning. Carry them as law. The man who stops explaining himself is not the man who stopped caring. He is the man who started respecting himself enough to stop seeking what was never his to seek. That is the code. And now, it belongs to you.